It up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil. Now, with the conflict continuing in Israel and Gaza, we'll be discussing the latest developments.
And during the Labour Party conference earlier the week, the big announcement from Keir Starmer was about building 1.5 million new homes over the next 5 years. And to make it bomb-proof, he said that he might have to ignore some local objections and build more houses on the Greenbelt. Is that a good idea? We will be having that as our big debate.
And as prison places are meant to surpass the prison capacity of the country, so reports are saying, we ask, are too many people going to prison, or do we not have enough prison places in this country? We want to hear your views on that.
I'm sure people have got strong opinions about that. I have strong opinions about that.
We both do.
And of course, we'll be discussing all the big stories of the day in the newspapers and the big stories of the week. We've got James Heal, political correspondent of The Spectator, and comedian John Martin to talk you through all of those stories. And of course, we want to hear what you think about all of those stories and anything else that you're thinking about today. Email us gbviews@gbnews.com.
Maybe what's that tie?
Yeah, well, yeah, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that tie. It's a quality tie, I'll have you know. But yeah, email us gbviews@gbnews.com and join in the conversation. But before we get stuck into all of those things, here's the headlines with the wonderful Pip Thompson.
A very good morning. It is just coming up to 2 minutes past 10. I'm Pip Thompson in the GB News, bringing you the very latest on the Israel-Hamas conflict. And we can report that an RAF flight carrying British nationals from Israel has now landed in Cyprus. The Air Force is assisting the Foreign Office arranging repatriation flights due to the current limited availability of commercial flights. What you're looking at now are live shots from Gaza, where airstrikes from the Israeli military have been continuing ahead of that expected invasion, that massive ground invasion expected in the next few hours. Some 1 million people living in northern Gaza have been told to evacuate. Many are fleeing by vehicle. They are going on foot. Meanwhile, Israeli Defence Forces are carrying out localised raids and ground troops have entered the territory. Now, the shots that you're looking at the moment, you can see the smoke rising above northern Gaza. This is the first ground incursion by Israel since last weekend's atrocious Hamas terrorist attack. Israel says Hamas is still holding at least 120 captives. Israel media is reporting that bodies of captives have been found during raids. But we are now getting reports that, and it is a very confusing picture, but there are now reports that the Israeli Defense Force has denied those stories about retrieving bodies from Gaza. Spokesman Richard Hecht, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht, says this claim is not accurate. We possess no information regarding this matter. So we will bring you more on that developing story as we get it. So airstrikes on Gaza City continuing overnight, and Israeli soldiers are claiming that they have killed one of the top leaders in Hamas. They also say they are destroying Hamas targets, announcing that they have killed dozens from the militant group, including its leader. These are some of the pictures of those airstrikes over the last few hours, absolutely flattening and pulverising buildings. This leader, who is believed to have been killed, has, we understand, had a key role in Hamas's massacre on Israel 1 week ago today. Now, Gaza's health ministry has reported that 324 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in the past 24 hours. A further 1,000 people have been wounded by airstrikes. Casualties are being brought to hospitals in southern Gaza as tens of thousands struggle to flee the shelling. You probably know that Israeli Defense Forces have given them a matter of hours to head south and find shelter and safety. Israeli journalist Yotam Confino told GB News that if those being told to move do not do so, this death toll could rise to much higher numbers.
Well, the latest is that there were just rockets fired over Tel Aviv, so I had to run for shelter just a couple of minutes ago. But of course, there is another situation which is more focused on right now, and that is Gaza, which is experiencing heavy bombardment by Israel. And Israel is, of course, encouraging civilians to move from the northern part of the Gaza Strip to the southern part. And I was just on an IDF briefing, a military briefing, where they said that they had announced 2 safe corridors where people can move safely for around 6 hours. And of course, they're hoping civilians will do that, because if they don't, the death toll in Gaza will rise significantly.
We will, of course, bring you the very latest on this unfolding conflict. Israel warning over 1 million Palestinians living in North Gaza to get out to find safety. Thousands upon thousands of people are currently fleeing by vehicle and fleeing on foot. You're watching GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, it's back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Pip. Well, obviously, big story of the day is what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And joining us now is Elon Levy from Tel Aviv, who is a former IDF veteran. Elon, thank you very much for joining us. I guess the big issue at the moment is that, I mean, lots of people obviously have lots of sympathy for what happened in Israel last week and have sympathy for Israel's desire to wipe out Hamas. But what responsibility does Israel have to avoid civilian casualties in Gaza when their sort of fully fledged attack on Gaza happens? How much responsibility does Israel have to avoid those casualties?
What happened on October 7th, the October 7th massacre, was the greatest terror attack in world history after 9/11. Israel lost 1,300 people who were murdered in brutal ISIS-style atrocities. And the responsibility that Israel is now taking to protect its civilians' lives is to make sure that Hamas never again has the capability to perpetrate such atrocities. Now, as for the situation inside the Gaza Strip, Israel is taking action that I don't think any other military in the world has taken, warning Palestinians in the northern part of the Gaza Strip to get out of the combat zone. Israel has no interest in seeing civilian casualties. Israel does not want to see civilian casualties. We have had enough of seeing innocent people being hurt in this fighting, which is why Israel is determined to make sure that this is the last war against Hamas, so that it can never perpetrate such atrocities again. And that is why Israel is warning the people of Gaza to get out of the way, even though Hamas, and I don't know whether you've reported this, has been urging people to stay put and to martyr themselves for the cause, because for Hamas, images of dead Palestinians on TV are good propaganda in order to get sympathy from the West. But Israel wants them to get out of the way because we do not want any civilians to get hurt.
Elon, you are right. We have said that Hamas has told people to remain in their homes. So a question, is 24 hours long enough to have those civilians leave their homes and flee?
Israel understands that an evacuation may take longer than 24 hours, but 24 hours is a much greater mercy than Hamas gave the civilians of southern Israel when they invaded without warning last Saturday morning and butchered everyone in their path. It's a lot more notice than Hamas gives Israelis when it launches rockets towards Israel. Israelis have a matter of seconds on the way from rockets, maybe 15 seconds. There are places in Israel where maybe they used to have 5 seconds to run from rockets, except last Saturday, Hamas went and butchered everyone living close to the Gaza Strip. So Israel understands this may take time, but it's urging civilians to get out of the way. We do not want to see civilians harmed, but it's important to understand Israel's goal in this war is to destroy Hamas. This is not a war that Israel wanted. It's not a war that Israel started. It's not a war that Israel even expected, but it is a war that Israel is going to win in order to protect its civilians, its citizens, and humanity from the ISIS-style barbarities that were inflicted on our innocent people last Saturday.
Elon Levy, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning from Tel Aviv.
Thank you.
Join us for the latest on this subject is defence editor of the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Robert, you heard what Elon Levy had to say there from Israel. Well, I mean, obviously the international community is very much behind Israel at the moment. Do you think that might change if you were to see pictures of lots of civilian casualties in Gaza?
Certainly public sympathy would change, and it's very, very delicate, as you know, you both politicians, you know how fragile this can be. I think that the good news is there's a lot of talking going on behind the scenes, and the Israeli authorities, we have to say that in plural, which is the Israeli Defense Force and the government, is actually moderating its language. We know they want to destroy Hamas. We know that they think that the bit they really needs to get is in northern Gaza. They're making inroads. There are these reports of commando raids bringing back bodies of hostages. That has been denied. There are certainly shaping operations of people going in, and there is the unconfirmed report of killing a key Hamas commander. They are preparing something, but they are a very, very well-trained command, and I think they're changing their plans as they go along.
In the Times today, an ex-Mossad chief said, you need to be not so hasty here, because what you don't want to see is agony on agony. So he was questioning the speed. He agreed that they should be warning people to get out of their homes, but he questions the speed.
That's Ephraim Halevi,
exactly,
who is a brilliant man. He's regarded, going into fiction, as Israel's answer to George Smiley. Very thoughtful spy chief. And he's saying, think of the rhythm of your planning. And I think this is where some of the commentary, if I may say so, Esther, has been a bit narrow in saying, what are you going to do next? What happens next? A strategic plan, you have to have a concept of the operation which says, I'm going to do that next, but that may be happening over there, and this comes in there. And this is where going to Qatar, which is a big money centre for Hamas and their pals in the Muslim Brotherhood, is so important. And this business of Blinken and British diplomats, for very obvious reasons, which unfortunately don't become pretty obvious to some of the media here, are very much involved in this, talking to allies and friends, particularly in countries like Jordan. I think it's not confusion. I think there's a lot going on. And I think that particularly this Israeli government, new Israeli government, is listening to the humanitarian case.
Robert, thank you very much indeed. You'll be with us throughout the day, and obviously Pip Thompson will be bringing us all the latest information as it happens throughout the day.
Now, to look through the top stories of today, we're delighted to be joined by political correspondent at The Spectator, James Hill, and comedian and writer John Martin. So, starting with you, James, come on. What have you got in the day's papers?
Well, the first story I picked up today was really ahead of that SNP conference tomorrow. The shock news about the defection from Lisa Cameron, the SNP MP, to the Tories.
Were you shocked?
I was shocked, yeah.
Were you shocked that actually the Tory party accepted her as well? I mean, which way were you shocked? That she left, she came to the Tory party, not the Labour Party?
SNP MP's already calling her Baroness Cameron.
Oh, I see, ahead of next year. Well, I think it was shocking because, you know, going from the ultra-nationalist party to the ultra-unionist party, no one's ever done that route before. And also the fact it didn't leak. And I think that's a credit to Rishi Sunak's team for keeping it so under wraps. And she came out and said it was the Prime Minister who took a leading role in all of this. But unfortunately, of course, as well as, you know, praising Rishi Sunak for reaching out to her after the year she's had, The Guardian now has a story today talking about some of the abuse she suffered, which is really quite shocking, some of the bric-a-brats, and I think that's a reflection of the quite poisonous independence debate and all of this.
And a difficult thing to do, a defection. As you said, people didn't find out. Who do you reach out to? How do you have those negotiations? How do the whips move you across? So, very well handled.
It was a well-handled operation on both sides, and I think that clearly Lisa Cameron, after speaking out last year about the SNP chief whip, about all the stuff that's been going on with the Westminster groups in terms of the bullying allegations, etc., clearly wanted to keep this very discreet and wanted to handle it properly. And, you know, it's a credit to her and Rishi Sunak's operation they were able to pull off for this operation without anyone noticing.
John, what's your big story of the day?
Well, before we start, I want to give you an apology. Last time I was on the show, and the producer said it would be, I actually said that there was I said there was a screwdriver named in honour of Philip. Do you remember? And I think I offended you. Did I offend you?
John,
it takes a lot to offend.
I am impossible to offend.
I could have said flathead, couldn't I?
I'm impossible to offend. Whatever you say, I've heard a lot worse.
No, you haven't.
Mainly from me, John.
Yeah, actually.
Oh, hang on, the boss is here.
Exactly. Tell me about it.
It's great being on your show. I mean, I'm sorry I was a little bit late getting here. I drove through Wales at 20 miles an hour. I was going that slow. 3 people actually asked me if I was looking for business. But it was... but it is fantastic to be here. We're, you know, and I actually live in Wales, so we are getting used to this 20 miles an hour.
A slow lifestyle.
Slow. We went into our local village the other day. I thought my car tax was going to run out. I was overtaken.
Have you got a story of the day, or is this like a Ken Dodd?
Oh, we're just
joke and laugh.
We do jokes. I mean, there's all sorts. I mean, I try and look into papers a lot, and I saw something funny in the Mirror this morning, but then I got dressed and came here. But there's all, you know, I mean, obviously going through the papers, I see, and I noticed the story today. Burger King are actually expanding. They're opening, I think it's 200 new restaurants. And as you can see, food is important to me. You know,
and me as well.
Oh, I can see. I thought your airbag had gone off, actually. But no,
so,
as you can see,
but maybe that's a positive thing. Then maybe that's a positive thing. Extra, you know, businesses
Esther,
opening on the high street.
Not with fast food with me. I'm trying so hard.
Won't be so fast in Wales, though, will it?
No,
slow food now. See where I'm going.
I actually joined Weight Watchers, but apparently just watching isn't enough. Well, I joined Weight Watchers on the internet.
John,
do you know what the first question they asked me was, Philip? Will you accept cookies? And I thought, this is my kind of place, this.
James,
I'm going to run this one past. See, though he likes his fast food and things in excess. What about this one, John? Because page 16 of The Sun today, maybe Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer ought to be listening to this, James. Here was the beer. Austrian political parties boost after free ale vow. A political party promising free kegs of beer and public booze fountains has sought to 3rd place in the polls in Austria. So, I mean, everyone goes on about housing and prisons and whatever. Maybe just go for simple free beer.
That's the way.
Would that work for you?
That would work for me.
James,
easily
what do you
bought
think?
off. Easy.
You're focusing on the wrong issues on The Spectator.
I think that actually, you know, there's a real place for politics that basically lets people have free choice, right? You know, after some of... Perhaps Rishi ought to rethink in light of its smoking plans.
Do you think that would work here?
I think free beer. I think, well, given the way in which people love the free money in COVID, perhaps there's a very good chance of it.
You know, you've just touched on the smoking thing. I mean, I never used to smoke. until Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. I'm on 80 a day now.
Well, you're going to be banned soon. You won't be able to, mind you. You're slightly older than 14, so you'll be OK.
But why don't politicians... I mean, you know, no offence to your profession, but shouldn't you just leave us alone?
Exactly.
Let us get on with it. I mean, imagine the amount of tax that cigarettes takes in.
Yeah, and that's what people say. That goes and pays for the hospital. Oh, do you want? Yeah, I have. I've got this one. What do you think of this? Don't send so many work emails. Only half of us read them. So it says that 4 in 10 people, employees, admit that if the email is longer than 8 sentences, they don't read it. They said if they don't like what is in the subject box, they don't read it. So are emails now a thing of the past? That's another thing they're saying. They think emails are out of date. You can't get the tone. You can't really see what somebody's saying, and there's lots of spam.
I think we've switched from letters to emails, now we're switching to texting. I actually have the opposite problem, which is that I need to expand my emails, and I think it's like a generational thing, which is I don't want to sound too blunt in my email, so I have to be like, hi, hope you're well, etc., a bit of filler, you know, before you get down to the please do this, you know, and then the best wishes at the end as kind of work.
Politicians thought they could move to WhatsApps as a way to correspond, and then they all got caught out.
Do you think this is a generational thing, John? Because
why are you looking at me if there's someone old on the panel?
Well,
yeah, that was exactly right, John.
Well, it's just that James brought the generational thing up because one of the things that we always say is that young people today always seem to email. They never pick up the phone and ring somebody up.
Yeah, I know.
What do you think that's a generation?
Well, do you know
what do you prefer doing?
It's strange. I mean, I'm a comedian, a bit like your Taylor. I do shows, and there's young people in the audience, and this isn't a gag. All you see is the tops of the heads because you're on doing a show and you cannot put the phones down.
But I do think picking up the phone is important. You talked about when you're doing an email and you tried to put the niceties in so people haven't lost the tone and the sentiments and think you're being abrupt. But I do think the phone call's really important. You
don't put any niceties in a phone call.
Oh, I do. I try to. But what I meant, even if you've got to deliver a tough message, you need to do it face-to-face or on the phone, don't you? It's not good enough just to send an email, surely.
But also, I've had cases of mistaken humour, which in the text it seems very blunt, but on the phone, obviously, you can hear it in someone's voice when there's sort of humour and the nuances. It's something I'm very bad at.
Do you ever find that people lose your humour, John?
Well, obviously Philip has. No, I'm giving you some stick today, Philip.
It's all right, less than normal.
We don't mind, because you'll be back in the next hour to give us your
I want people to know that Philip is a great friend, not of mine. But
coming up next, as John goes and checks out the paper and James does for the next hour, coming next, we've got Sir Keir Starmer this week declared himself a YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, and pledged that a Labour government would ignore local objections and build on the green belt to ensure his house-building targets are bomb-proof. Stick around for a debate on that.
Plus, prisons at breaking point means some criminals, including rapists and robbers, could not be jailed as early as may be expected. Do we need to build more prisons? Are we just jailing too many people? A lawyer and a policeman join us to discuss that. We'll be back in a moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debates. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10:24. Now, to build or not to build? That is the question.
Yes, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer this week threw his weight behind solving the housing crisis, saying a Labour government would not only build 1.5 million new homes, but would also introduce new rules to allow housing developers to bypass objections from the locals.
Sir Keir said he wants to help people realise the dream of home ownership, and when asked if he considers himself a YIMBY, yes in my backyard, he said yes.
But is the Labour leader right to want to build more houses on the green belt, or could it have a devastating effect on our beloved countryside?
Well, we're joined now by Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the Chairman of the Community Planning Alliance, Rosie Pearson. Both of you, thank you for joining us. Henry, surely building affordable housing in town centres and on brownfield sites is the way to help young people onto the housing ladder rather than concreting over the green belt.
The green belt is a really misleading term because I think people think it always means beautiful fields, areas of outstanding natural beauty. It doesn't. It's literally an area that Labour drew around cities in the 1940s to stop them growing. So there's loads of areas which are actually kind of derelict or scrapyards, and you see photos of them all the time. And areas like that, we need towns to expand. Yes, building more in city centres is brilliant. The Tories, should have done that a long time ago because they have a lot more incentive to do that than Labour do. But towns and cities grow over time. Our population is vastly bigger than it was after the war, and it's absurd that our urban footprint hasn't been able to catch up.
So many of my constituents say those bits of land, yes, if they're not the green belt and it's not properly protected, but what about the infrastructure? What about the doctors? What about the schools? What about the gas, electricity? What is it that is stopping those areas being built on?
Well, I mean, partly because it is the green belt. I think that's the point. The green belt does not just apply to beautiful countryside. It's a term that applies to
exceptional circumstances. No. There's exceptional circumstances there.
There's loads of land which has green belt protection, and it's very difficult. We have a planning system which allows people to object at any stage. Politicians can randomly call it in, local council, all the way up to the Secretary of State. It makes it very, very expensive. Now, yes, you could bulldoze through housing if you had the political will, but the political will hasn't been there, and as a result, we're now 4 million houses short of where we need to be, according to Centre for Cities, and we're seeing that not only in house prices being extortionate, but the rent crisis in our cities.
But we'll ask about that a little bit later. Who are those people who need the houses?
Let's bring in Rosie Pearson, the chairman of the Community Planning Alliance. Rosie, thanks for joining us. We've obviously got a housing shortage in the country. Keir Starmer says we're going to have to stand up and ignore the NIMBYs, and we're going to if we're going to build the number of houses that we need, people are struggling to get on the housing ladder because there aren't enough houses. Keir Starmer's got a point, hasn't he?
Well, I mean, the first thing is you were talking a few minutes ago about niceties in emails, and Sir Keir this week has forgotten niceties, hasn't he? He's talking about bulldozing communities, he's talking about blockers, ignoring communities, NIMBYs. It's all divisive and it's all a distraction from what actually matters, which is to build. Essentially what we need is to ensure that everybody has a safe roof over their heads and that we live within our environmental needs. No one's talking about that. It's always build, build, build. It's about chipping away at the green belt. There's actually another thing to do with the green belt is to say, look, that the green belt should grow as population grows. It's public good. It's there to give green space and breathing space to people in cities. So what we need is a proper, sensible, evidence-based review of green belts. We don't need this constant rhetoric about blockers and NIMBYs. That doesn't help at all.
Well, the thing is, Rosie, whenever a housing development's proposed, there'll always be a group of people who say, no, I'm objecting to this, I don't want to see this, and because it might affect their view, or it might affect, fear it might affect their house price or whatever. And so if forever local objections are carrying so much weight with the local authority, then we're never going to build the houses that we need. That's the point that Keir Starmer's making, I think.
I think that the issue is that, firstly, the right kind of houses aren't being built. They are always unaffordable. They're always out of reach of people in the local area that see these estates going up outside their villages. That the infrastructure isn't provided, as we've heard already, and the system forces people to become objectors. It doesn't plan with communities. Planning is done to communities. So what we need is local plans at the very beginning to involve communities so that they can have a say in their own future. So stop portraying normal people, normal residents, as blockers and saying they have to be bulldozed over. Involve them in their future. And I think we need to start thinking, let's embrace communities, embrace nature, and you can have everything. You can have a safe roof for everyone over their head, the environment, and you can have a prosperous future with natural capital at the centre of it. So I just think the whole debate is so divisive. Calling people NIMBYs doesn't help anyone at all, and we need to have a proper evidence-based debate. Things like the housing targets that people throw around, they're not based on evidence. People in different parties pluck them out of thin air. The standard formula that councils have to use at the moment to work out how many houses they built is based on out-of-date figures. So we just need to go back to evidence and ratchet down the rhetoric.
Rosie Pearson, thank you. Henry, has she got a point there? Plucking figures out the air, building on places you don't need to?
The housing targets are only arbitrary in that they are too low. They are far lower than the number we would actually need to build to solve the housing crisis. They're calculated at roughly what politicians think they might be able to get away with.
But do you think they're changing rapidly because of the number of people coming into the country? We had 600,000 people. Is that the issue, the number of people entering the country? Because put it this way, Keir Starmer's targets wouldn't even last 2 years at the moment. So are we talking we need 1 million houses to be built a year? That's many cities that we're building each year.
We need 450,000 to be built a year in order to solve the housing crisis within 20 years. And, yeah, high immigration absolutely doesn't help. But this is a problem that goes back decades, and people have seen it coming since the 1970s. The simple fact is we have a growing population, and we have choked off our cities. And that means that instead of expanding into, some fields, which no one really uses, we have more pressure on urban green space, no parks, no gardens. It's terrible, and we need to fix it.
Henry Hill, thank you very much indeed. Let us know what you think about that. Email us gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, coming up next with reports this week that our prisons are overflowing. Do we need more prisons, or are we sending too many people to prison? A policeman and a barrister will battle it out.
And this week marked 39 years since the notorious Brighton bombing, an attempt on the life of Margaret Thatcher by the IRA. And we're joined by a man who remembers it well, our very own Michael Portillo.
But first, here's the news headlines with Pip Thompson.
Good morning, it's nearly 10:32. Let me bring you the latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Now, we're getting reports coming in saying that the United States is working with Israel, Egypt and Qatar to open the Rafah border crossing in southern Gaza. Now, that would be to help Egypt get Palestinians out of Gaza and for them to get humanitarian aid in. They are working to open that corridor from 12 till 5 o'clock this afternoon. Now, there are also new aid flights arriving in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Relief materials, they are being held until there can be safe passage to get that delivery into the nearby Gaza Strip, the southern Gaza Strip, because there are over 1 million people fleeing these Israeli airstrikes and, of course, this ground offensive, a massive ground offensive by Israeli forces, which we understand is imminent. The IDF has told people to get out and head south. The problem is where are they going to find shelter? You are looking at live pictures of Gaza. You can see smoke rising at the moment, which could well be due to those Israeli airstrikes which are pummeling Gaza City. Now, the Palestinian Health Ministry says at least 2,269 Palestinians have been killed and almost 10,000 wounded due to Israeli attacks in the Gaza Strip that you're looking at now and in the West Bank. Israeli Defense Forces have been carrying out localised raids and ground troops have entered the territory. That smoke now settling over the northern part of Gaza. It has been the first ground incursion by Israel since last week's horrific terrorist atrocities by Hamas. Israel says Hamas is still holding at least 120 captives. Israeli media has reported that bodies of the captives have been found during raids, but that has not been confirmed yet by the Israeli Defense Force. Meanwhile, an RAF flight carrying British nationals from Israel has now landed in Cyprus, and the Air Force is assisting the Foreign Office to arrange repatriation flights due to the current limited availability of commercial flights. Now, as we've been telling you all morning, and you've just been seeing the images, airstrikes on Gaza City have been continuing, with reports now that the Israeli Defense Forces have claimed at least one of the leaders of Hamas. This has not been confirmed, though, by the proscribed terrorist organisation. Israeli military says it is destroying Hamas targets in its strikes, saying that it has killed many people from the militant group, including, as I say, a senior commander in Gaza City. That senior commander is believed to have had a key role in Hamas's massacre 1 week ago today. Gaza's health ministry is reporting that several hundred Palestinians have been killed in the airstrikes, many hundreds of people also wounded. Casualties are being brought to hospitals in South Gaza. Tens of thousands are still struggling to flee the shelling. But as we just told you a few moments ago, there are efforts underway to get the Rafah border crossing in southern Gaza open to allow people to get out, to allow Palestinians to find safety in Egypt and also to get humanitarian aid in. Israeli journalist Yotam Confino has told GB News that if those being told to move do not do so, the death toll could rise to even higher numbers.
Well, the latest is that there were just rockets fired over Tel Aviv, so I had to run for shelter just a couple of minutes ago. But of course, there is another situation which is more focused on right now, and that is Gaza, which is experiencing heavy bombardment by Israel. And Israel is, of course, encouraging civilians to move from the northern part of the Gaza Strip to the southern part. And I was just on an IDF briefing, a military briefing, where they said that they had announced 2 safe corridors where people can move safely for around 6 hours. And of course, they're hoping civilians will do that, because if they don't, the death toll in Gaza will rise significantly.
Meanwhile, the Israeli army says it is looking into an incident involving a Reuters journalist in southern Lebanon. Now, this is on the border with northern Israel, where the conflict could be breaking out there as well. Issam Abdallah was killed on Friday when missiles struck him and a group of other journalists. They were working in Alma al-Shab, near the border, the northern Israeli border, where the Israeli military and Hezbollah have been exchanging fire. 6 other journalists were injured. OK, I will be back with the very latest on this Israel-Hamas conflict very shortly. It is a fast-moving situation. But you are watching GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now it's back to Esther and Phil.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. It's 10:41. Now, reports this week claim that Britain's prisons are at breaking point.
Crown Court sentencings are expected to be delayed to prevent prison overcrowding, meaning anyone on bail will be free in the community or kept in cells in magistrates' courts.
Reports have sparked a debate over the state of our prison system. Do we need to build more prisons and get more criminals locked up? or we're putting too many people in prison who don't really need to be there?
Well, we're joined now by barrister and Professor of Legal Practice, Deakin Law School, Dr. Felicity Jerry KC. So, if we're thinking, or you're thinking, too many people are going to prison, who shouldn't be going to prison?
OK, well, first of all, it's Felicity Gerry with a hard G. To answer your question, there are many people in prison already who shouldn't be there. So an audit of prisons already would find people who should be on bail, people who are still subject to the public protection, abolished laws, people who've been wrongly locked up under the disgraceful laws of joint enterprise. And what we have, instead of being tough on crime, mostly we're just tough on vulnerable people. There are a few people, of course, who are dangerous, but most people are messy. And prisons are full of people who have been, if you like, victims of utterly chaotic and disorganised penal policy that means that we're in the situation that we're in now. So far few people should be in prison, far more people need alternative services. And what we need to look at is crime prevention. And this is not new. People have been warning about this situation for decades. And frankly, the politicians simply haven't listened. In many ways, you can liken it to John Malkovich's character in Johnny English. He wanted to turn mainland Britain into the world's biggest prison. It's a joke, and it's an utter political failure that we're seeing this situation this week.
I just wanted to go back, Felicity, there, to who shouldn't be in prison. You talked about people on joint enterprise. That could be a murder or something serious. So what crimes shouldn't be going to prison?
So joint enterprise, by way of an example, is an area of law that I'm an expert in. And what we have now is charging decisions where when one person commits a crime, we charge maybe 5, 6, 7, sometimes up to 10 or 11 people, often children in groups. And the Court of Appeal have said people can be convicted with making no measured or measurable contribution to the crime. So you might have 9 children in...
Felicity, could we just cut in there? Because we don't need a lecture on joint enterprise. Some of us know it. And it seemed to me you couldn't tell us who shouldn't be going to prison there. So, Peter, let's bring Peter in.
We're also joined in the studio by former Metropolitan Police Detective Peter Blexley. Peter, I mean, the government have been building record numbers of prison places. There's more jails than ever before. There's more prison places than ever before. They get in full, seems to be quicker and quicker. Felicity might have a point, might she, that we can't just sort of keep locking more and more people up and building more and more prisons. At some point, we're going to have to look at alternatives, aren't we?
The learned professor spouts utter nonsense, which is quite frankly very dangerous. And I'll use her word, a few people that should be in prison. What complete and utter tripe. Our nation, sadly, is heading at a rapid kind of pace into a land of lawlessness. And if people don't believe me, let me say there's 800 retail workers assaulted every day of the week. Over 100 police officers assaulted every day of the week. Don't believe some of the stats, the unreliable and untrue stats that certain politicians will spout. The whole criminal justice system is a mess. We need more prison spaces, and as a result of a failing criminal justice system, we are all at greater risk.
And just quickly on this point that the government have run out of prison places, so it seems that that's what the situation is. If you were in that situation, you can't just build the prison place and they're open tomorrow. Until more prison places are actually there, how should the government manage this? Who should they let out of prison, and if they have to, in order to make sure that we deal with the capacity problems?
It is a dreadful quandary, and we shall see what Alex Chalk, Justice Secretary, says about this ridiculous situation on Monday. Quite frankly, we need more people in prison, not less.
I was going to go back to Felicity there. Felicity, you will have heard what the former police officer said there. So you're, some would say, soft on law, and that is actually now leading to a lawless society. More people need to be going to prison.
Well, OK, so I'm not soft. I did explain to you that some people are dangerous, but other people, you need to take a crime prevention approach. So for people who are currently waiting to be sentenced, what the government has failed to do is invest in those alternatives. For those people already in prison, all we need to do is audit those prisons. Let's have a look who's in there that is no longer or never was a risk to society. That's what people are frightened of, that somebody who is a risk will be out and not monitored or supervised or engaging in addiction or mental health services. So it's perfectly possible to do these things, but they're not being done. I'm afraid I couldn't hear your previous speaker, but to suggest that we need more than 90,000 people in prison is really quite blinkered and fails to have regard to all the available evidence-based research. So we can shout with rhetoric, but what we're doing is ignoring the people who should not be in prison or should not be going to prison, instead of identifying those who should be in there and who at the moment can't be in there because of the failed governance situation.
Felicity Gerry, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us, and Peter Blexley, thank you too for your time. Let us know what you think. Have we got enough prison places, or are we sending too many people to prison? Should we be building more? I'm sure you've got strong views on that. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Well, this week marked 39 years since the infamous Brighton bombing.
On the 12th of October 1984, the IRA let off a deadly explosive at the Grand Hotel in Brighton during the Conservative Party conference, killing 5 people, including the then Deputy Chief Whip, Sir Anthony Berry, and injuring 31 more.
The attack, which was targeting Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, has gone down as one of the most notorious terrorist attacks in British history.
A man who remembers it better than most is our very own GB News star, Michael Portillo, and he's in the studio now. Michael, thank you for joining us. Obviously, this is a personal story to this, because Sir Anthony Berry, who was tragically killed in that bomb, was the MP for Enfield Southgate, and you won the subsequent by-election that took place. What are your reflections on what happened sort of 39 years on?
Well, it was the most traumatic event. I wasn't actually a witness to it. I'd been in the Grand Hotel until about 2:30 in the morning, disgracefully drinking at the bar.
And it was 2:54, so you were very, very nearly there.
I was close by. I had a row with a journalist I was talking to. I was an assistant to government ministers, and I was trying to defend government policy, and I had a row with him, and I left the hotel because I was staying somewhere else. And I remember he was arguing with me, and he kept beating a pillar in the bar and saying, you know, your government's policies to create unemployment, and that is a fact. This is a pillar. That is a fact. And I thought, my God, about half an hour later, that pillar was rubble. So the thing that had demonstrated him absolute certainty had crumbled. So, I mean, in the morning, I was working for Nigel Lawson, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I teamed up with him. He'd been evacuated from the Grand Hotel, of course. I remember just standing across the street and looking at the scene of devastation, because all of the centre of the hotel had collapsed. The bomb had been very well plotted, if that's the thing to say. It was quite low down in the hotel, and I think they knew well enough that it would bring down the roof, which was the destruction. Obviously, Margaret Thatcher was extremely lucky to survive. The bathroom of her suite was wrecked. She was, of course, the target. This followed a period in which, well, firstly, of course, the IRA had assassinated Airey Neave, her right-hand man and the great war hero. That was even before she became Prime Minister. Then after she became Prime Minister, Bobby Sands and 9 others who were prisoners starved themselves to death. And Margaret Thatcher allowed that to happen. She wouldn't give way. And the IRA decided that they were out to kill her.
Now, just a few hours after that bombing, it went off at 2:54. She was then taken to the local police station. She was there till 4 a.m. And then coming out of that, John Cole, the BBC reporter, spoke to her and she said, the conference will be going on. We will be doing that. I wonder, today, would that conference have been cancelled?
I think it depends entirely who the Prime Minister is or was. I mean, this Prime Minister would brook no opposition. I dare say the police said to her, this is not a wise thing to do, but she would have said the most important thing is for the government to show that it is unswayed by terror, which was why, after all, she had resisted the hunger strikers who starved themselves to death. And so for her, it was absolutely vital that conference open on time. And she was able to say so defiantly, we will not be pushed from our course by terror. We are not in fear of terror, even though we mourn those who have been killed by terror.
Now, one of the other terrible consequences of the bomb was a terrible accident to Norman Tebbett's wife.
Well, accident. I mean, yes. She
in
was
terms of her
terribly
injuries.
injured in
yes,
the bomb,
exactly.
yes.
And people say that without those injuries, Norman Tebbit could well have become the Prime Minister after Margaret Thatcher, and that, in effect, that robbed the country of Norman Tebbit becoming Prime Minister. Do you see it like that? Do you think that Norman Tebbit would have become Prime Minister without that? Did it change the course of history of this country in that way?
Because he had to nurse his wife, didn't he?
I wouldn't say it as categorically as that. I mean, we all know that we go into a leadership election thinking we know who's going to win, and we're nearly always wrong. So,
you know that better than most, Michael.
I know it pretty well. So, no, I wouldn't put it as categorically as that. But the tragedy of Margaret Tebbett's injuries, the fact that she was in a wheelchair for the rest of her life, that she was cared for most lovingly by Norman Tebbit until the end of her life, I mean, all of this is tragic and moving. It's also remarkable that two people who were extremely badly injured, Norman Tebbit and John Wakeham, are both with us today.
Absolutely. Just very quickly, on the current political situation that we've just had the conference season, how do you think Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are doing?
I didn't expect that twist. Well, as Starmer had a good conference and Rishi had a difficult conference, I still think that both men are some distance from convincing the British public that they know what they would do in government. And I think the British public may gradually be coming to understand that what is needed is fundamental reform of the National Health Service, fundamental reform of the public services in general, and neither of them is talking about fundamental reform.
Michael Portillo, thank you very much indeed. You will be on our screens tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. We'll be watching.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. Now, coming up in the next hour, more updates from the devastating conflict in Israel and Gaza and all the latest from the world of sport.
Plus, the Grand National introduces new regulations for the most famous race in the world. Is this a long overdue change, or is it a capitulation to protesters? We'll be speaking to the Chief Executive of the Jockey Club. All of this and much more coming up next.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Certainly feels that autumn is now in full swing. We've got northerly winds bringing rather cold air down from the Arctic across the UK. Do notice how those isobars are really tightly packed together in the northeast. 70-mile-an-hour gusts across the Fair Isles this morning and will remain pretty blustery across northeastern and eastern areas of the UK, making it feel even colder here. Those northerly winds bringing showers down as well will turn wintry over the higher grounds of Scotland, maybe some hail to lower levels of Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. Best of the shelter for the Scottish borders down towards Norfolk, but temperatures below average for the time of year, generally 10 to 13 degrees Celsius. Showers will tend to ease off a touch inland overnight, probably still persisting across some windward coastal areas, might push through the Cheshire Gap as well. But underneath those starry skies that we see elsewhere, temperatures will be dropping off rapidly. A widespread frost for many of us, and certainly seeing down to -3, -5 degrees Celsius in some rural areas. So quite a chilly start to Sunday morning, but it will also provide a fair amount of sunshine as well. The showers really easing off for most of us. They will persist though across the far north of Scotland where it will be cloudier here, but for elsewhere a good amount of sunshine throughout the day, and with lighter winds as well, that might just make it feel that little bit better, but temperatures still no better than 10 to 13 degrees Celsius. We hold on to the fine conditions into the start of next week as well. Might turn a little bit unsettled later on in the week though. Enjoy your day.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil. Now, as the conflict continues in Israel and Gaza, we'll be bringing you the latest developments.
And earlier this week, the Jockey Club announced changes to the Grand National. They own Aintree Racecourse, and they're going to reduce the field, and they're going to make the run-up to the first fence shorter to try and improve welfare of the horses. Are these necessary changes, or are they capitulating to the fanatics and protesters who tried to disrupt last year, the race earlier this year? We'll be speaking to the chief executive of the Jockey Club and ask him which of those it is.
And as the presidential elections get closer, we'll be speaking to a leading Democrat who will be telling us what Joe Biden will be doing. Will it be a Biden-Trump rematch? We'll be catching up on the latest with that.
Does Biden know what he's doing, let alone anyone else? I don't know. And of course, we're going to go through the big stories of the day with James Heal, political correspondent at The Spectator, and comedian John Martin, who no doubt will be hurling more abuse in my direction. And of course, we want to hear what you think about all of these stories, so please email us gbviews@gbnews.com. But before all of that, here's the headlines with Pip Thompson.
Phil, thank you. Bringing you the latest headlines from the GB newsroom. And we're getting reports that the United States says it is working with Israel, Egypt and Qatar to open the Rafah border crossing from southern Gaza into Egypt to allow people to flee and to hopefully get humanitarian aid in. They are working to open that corridor from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock this afternoon. You are now looking at live shots of Gaza City, where Israeli airstrikes have been pummeling buildings. More than 1 million Palestinians in northern Gaza have a deadline of later this afternoon to flee south to find shelter. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, says that Israel has only just begun to retaliate for last week's Hamas terrorist atrocity across southern Israel. Now, Israeli Defence Forces say over 120 civilians are being held captive in Gaza by the terrorist group. So far, in Gaza, that's the pictures that you're looking at now, the aftermath of the latest Israeli airstrikes, more than 2,200 people have been killed. 2,200 Palestinians dead and almost 10,000 wounded due to those Israeli attacks in the Gaza Strip, and also violence that has broken out on the West Bank, violence between Palestinian protesters and Israeli forces. Now, Israeli forces have been carrying out localised raids. Ground troops have entered Gazan territory. Well, let's get the very latest now from Charlie Peters, who is in Tel Aviv. Charlie, bring us up to date, can you? I know in the last few minutes you've actually had to hide in a bunker because of finding shelter from rocket attacks.
That's right, and as the US extends its humanitarian hand in those diplomatic engagements with Qatar, Israel and Egypt to open the Rafah crossing, it is also helping to sharpen Israel's spear. And part of the way they're doing that is replenishing the munitions used for Israel's Iron Dome air defense system. And that is the system that has been intercepting rockets landing and striking Tel Aviv here, intercepting so far all of them. But across Israel, there has been only a 90% success rate of the Iron Dome defense system. We've had successful strikes in Sderot in the south earlier today, and in Ashkelon, about 20 kilometers south of us here, there have been several successful rocket attacks. And this comes as this battle space becomes even more complex. There were reports of more raids from terrorists in the south of Lebanon this morning, drone strikes and artillery fire exchange. And this comes after last night when a Reuters journalist was killed by an Israeli strike on those Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon. And all of this at the same time as Israel gathers that armoured convoy, that invading force, over 100,000 troops on the southern border with Gaza for that likely ground incursion in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Charlie, if we can, I want to show pictures from Gaza City where people have been fleeing. More than 1 million people are trying to find safety in southern Gaza, and there are multiple warnings about the humanitarian disaster that could be unfolded. Aid agencies are saying that supplies are dwindling, water is running out.
Yes, in the last few minutes, we heard that the Gazans are now running out of water, and it comes as the IDF extended their deadline for that humanitarian evacuation this morning after severe criticism throughout the international community for giving just 24 hours notice for 1.1 million people to head south. The UN said it was impossible. The International Red Cross said it could not be done. There are just 2 main supply routes and 1.1 million people to cut down half of the Gaza Strip in this time of conflict and devastation is an extreme demand. Hamas said this morning that yesterday some 70 civilians were hit in an Israeli airstrike. We've reviewed the footage and we can't verify it at this time, but it's very clear that something appalling has happened on one of those convoys heading south. As they extend that corridor, which ends in 3 hours from now, it's unclear what will happen next. How many civilians will be left? Will the Israeli Air Force continue their strikes, or will they take it even further and escalate into using more severe munitions to try and clear out Hamas from those underground tunnels?
And Charlie, just give us a little bit of idea of the geography, because you are in Tel Aviv. Just tell us how far away that is from the Gaza Strip. And also, when we were just talking to you, it looked like quite a nice scene behind you, but it really is not. It is not normal life at all, is it, for people in Tel Aviv or the rest of Israel?
Yeah, that's right. We're about an hour's drive north of the Gaza Strip, but rockets have been coming from Gaza, fired up in this direction day and night for the last 7 days. And on a Saturday afternoon like this beach would be heaving with people. It's usually a party culture. It's a place of relaxation and joy. But this beach is empty as people prepare for further conflict, and they prepare also to take shelter. There have been a heightened level of rocket sirens in Tel Aviv in the last 24 hours, and this scene also becoming a place where people come back from after experiencing atrocities in the south, and also recuperating from injuries in the north. Many reservists coming back to Tel Aviv after fighting on the front line. It's not a normal place for Tel Aviv to be in right now, but it certainly is a city that is mobilizing to try and support its forces and its civilians across the country.
Charlie, for now, thank you very much. We will, of course, return to you with the latest developments. Well, airstrikes on Gaza City through the night flattened many sections and pulverised buildings. And there's reports that one of the senior commanders of Hamas was killed in those Israeli airstrikes. The Israeli military said it is destroying Hamas targets and has killed dozens of people from the militant groups. That commander, it is understood, led the attack on Israeli settlements last Saturday, a week ago today. Well, casualties are being brought to hospitals in South Gaza. Tens of thousands of people are struggling to flee the shelling to find some sort of shelter. And Israeli journalist Yotam Confino has told GB News that if those being told to move do not do so, the death toll could rise to much higher numbers.
Well, the latest is that there were just rockets fired over Tel Aviv, so I had to run for shelter just a couple of minutes ago. But of course, there is another situation which is more focused on right now, and that is Gaza, which is experiencing heavy bombardment by Israel. And Israel is, of course, encouraging civilians to move from the northern part of the Gaza Strip to the southern part. And I was just on an IDF briefing, a military briefing, where they said that they had announced 2 safe corridors where people can move safely for around 6 hours. And of course, they're hoping civilians will do that, because if they don't, the death toll in Gaza will rise significantly.
And we're also getting reports from Reuters that an Israeli airstrike has hit a Palestinian rescue team while operating out there and trying to save people. We'll bring you the very latest here on GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now, it's back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks very much indeed there, Pip. And as she said, we'll be going back for the update to Pip as and when things happen. Now, our next guest is the Associate Fellow of the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House, and that is Professor Yossi Mechtelberg. And hello. Good to have you with us this morning. Now, the world absolutely sympathises with Israel after what happened last week. However, the question here is, if lots of civilians, as a result of the Israeli retaliation, die or get injured, do you think that sympathy from the international community will move on or stop?
Good morning. Yes, no doubt what hit Israel last week created this kind of sympathy and empathy with the suffering of so many innocent people, a lot of life, and so many taken hostages, and we don't know what conditions they are. At the same time, it's not only about the sympathy, it's also about the solution. Where people heading? If it's heading to the killing of so many innocent Palestinians and increase the suffering of people that have already suffered for so long, I think greatly we will precipitate it. But I think the most important thing that will start looking for the day after the war.
Yossi, I'm sorry to interrupt and cut across you there. The sound is very bad at the moment. It's bouncing back and forth. So if we say goodbye for the time being, sort out the sound and come back to you later in the show or the next show. Thank you.
We're also joined again by Robert Fox, the defence editor of the Evening Standard. Robert, we're already hearing about some of the effects of some of the Israeli attacks on what's happening now in Gaza. Do you think Israel are conscious about the views of the rest of the international community, or not? Do they not really care about that the mission's more important than what the international community think?
I think it's both. Philip, I think that they are aware. But I think that the mission is vitally important, because such is the shock, the strategic shock, because they'd never had anything quite like that, of the attacks of the settlements and the kibbutzim around to the east of Gaza last weekend. I think we're beginning to detect they're feeling their way very clearly, but that we are beginning to see the shaping of the ground operation. And what is worrying, that it seems that they're going to try and do it on 3 axes, including one in the south. And it's quite clear that this brings friction with the international community, because it seems that they're trying to get an agreement through Qatar, Egypt, and other Arab powers. Britain, I think, would certainly be involved in this, being led by the US, to get a corridor out of the south of Gaza to Egypt. But, oh boy, the Egyptians historically are very reluctant about this.
I mean, when you open up a corridor like this, how do they know that it's not being used by Hamas to get their people out rather than to get civilians out?
That's what the Egyptian security authorities would say right off, because they've been caught this way before, habitually, over the time. But it's not only this is, it's such a mixture. It's not only terrorists, politically motivated people. There's an awful lot of organised crime gets involved in this, and it finds very, very rich pickings, because it's not only the usual things of drugs and human trafficking. Organised crime loves the black market arms industry, and they would have supplied quite a bit of the stuff to Hamas, the components that they've been firing, as we were hearing from the report from Tel Aviv. I don't think we'll see a big ground operation for a day or so yet, but time is running out.
Robert, thank you very much indeed for your insight and expertise into what's happening, and I'm sure you'll be joining us later on to give us more of your thoughts.
Now to look through what else is happening in the papers today, what other news stories are around. We're delighted to say we're joined by the political correspondent of The Spectator, James Heal, and comedian and writer John Martin. So, James, give us your story this hour.
Well, I was really quite struck by quite a fun story earlier this week, which is that apparently users of Amazon's program Alexa, when they're praising this device, refer to it as a female pronoun, saying she, Alexa, her, etc. But when they're criticising Amazon, they refer to it as they or them or it. So I think it's interesting how pronouns affect kind of coverage and how we view different technological devices. And this study by Stanford and Oxford researchers also found that people would, if they didn't trust Amazon Alexa, they would only have her in certain rooms of the house. Perhaps, rooms where they wouldn't mind conversation being overheard, but perhaps if they talk in their sleep, wouldn't want it in their bedroom, for instance. So I think it's an interesting kind of conversation in terms of how we view technological devices and, how perhaps referring to something as a female softens it in our minds and how we want to praise it.
Hear that, Phil?
Yeah.
Seeing something as for me softens it. So I also have to say, I don't have either of them in the house at all. It isn't just in certain rooms. I don't want them listening to anything.
I already have one woman nagging me all the time, James. I do not need another one. John, what's your big story?
Well, I've just seen a strange headline in the paper this morning. It said, Jordan to run for Speaker of Congress. I thought Katie Price will do anything for publicity. But my big thing was, I'm coming from Liverpool because we had the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. And it was apparently a huge success. And Rachel Reeves gave a humdinger of a speech. And she said she's going to chase people on this COVID backlog thing, And I hope she does. I hope she sticks to her word. She gave a figure of like £6 million or something. But I don't know, where's the rest gone? Where's 37 billion gone? on track and trace. It didn't work, so there's no trace of it, so where's that gone? How come all these VIP lanes are not being investigated? I would personally bring in someone like a Carol Vorderman. Let her, she's fantastic on social media. Let her head the inquiry. Because I'll be honest with you, Phil, I was one of 3 million people who were excluded. Both my wife and I got nothing off the government for 18 months, 2 years. And we desperately wanted Rachel Reeves. Yeah, I know your MPs of a party, but there's no chance Rishi Sunak's going to get 3 million votes. And their families and their friends. He's toast. And we were desperately hanging on for Rachel Reeves to say, I will look at the backstory of the excluded. We fought and fought and fought during COVID. People got nothing. There was suicides. MPs...
So do you think she missed an opportunity?
I
then?
do.
She didn't
There's 3 million votes floating here,
When you say the
Esther.
excluded, those are the people who didn't get furloughed.
Absolutely.
Those are the people during COVID didn't get... And so you were disappointed then that they didn't say anything
Rachel
on that.
Reeves should have said, and please say it, say it now.
Well, that's all.
You will look into it. And there's 3 million votes. That could get Labour over the line. And can I just say as well, I just want to say this, all the MPs, they gave lip service and they gave a speech here and he stood up in the House of Commons. One MP absolutely stood shoulder to shoulder with us. She was fantastic. She spoke in the House of Commons. She spoke at committees. We had a rally in London. It was pouring with rain. She came and stood next to me in the rain. She organised conferences and Zooms, all sorts. She tried to campaign to get money back from the supermarkets. And that was a lady called Esther McVeigh. I don't know whatever happened to her. I heard she got married and went off the boiler.
Went off the rails.
You were fantastic for the excluded, and they've never forgotten it.
Well, put it this way, in the Independent today, looking at who could win the next election, whilst they say, they think Labour's ready for maybe government, it shows that Labour haven't won people over, particularly the 2019 voters. It said, actually, 2/3 don't think that Labour is ready. So it's interesting, maybe the things you're talking about...
There's millions of voters who are homeless.
Yes.
Certainly on the excluded, forgotten limited, and all these people, they're homeless.
Do you think that the government have got a problem with the COVID stuff? And I mean, is Rachel Reeves onto something when she says that she's going to go after these people who sort of defrauded the COVID funds?
Yeah, well, that's one element to it, the financial element. But there's also this COVID inquiry which is ongoing right now, and I think it's going to be a lot of bad headlines that come out of it for years to come. I think a little bit in the sense that people have kind of forgotten how, COVID, there was a lot of money, I think 600 billion spent, and now we've got to pick up the tab for that, and no one wants to frankly do that. And that's going to be very hard, whoever wins the next election, and getting back some of the money that was misspent in that, because so much was involved with it, and also dealing with the inquiry, are going to be the big issues facing us for the next 10 years to come.
So why aren't the fraud squad involved then? Why aren't Scotland Yard involved?
Well, they could well be, couldn't they?
Well, hopefully, you're talking about prisons. Hopefully, you're talking about prisons today and how they're overcrowded. Hopefully, they'll make some space because people have to go to prison.
Well, also,
over what happened.
People were screaming at the time for money to go out the system,
So
and Labour's one of them.
the bounce-back loans were one that actually people didn't pay back. There were various things that didn't get back.
Oh, people were setting shell companies up and all sorts. It was ludicrous. I know you can argue that it was set up quickly and all that, but it was ridiculous.
Well, I'm hoping all of that comes out in the COVID inquiry, John.
Now, John, it's obligatory on a Saturday morning we have to have a sex story.
OK, well, I'm your man for that. It might only be a short segment.
Page 20 of The Sun.
Oh, I was looking at page 3 to be honest. There you go.
I saw you looking at that earlier, to be honest. Leg over the hill is the headline, and page 20 of The Sun, leg over the hill. Good sex is key to happiness as you get older. Apparently, those who felt fulfilled in the bedroom had higher levels of life satisfaction in middle and older age, which sounds like a statement of the obvious, but apparently Professor Andrei Hajek of Hamburg Center for Health Economics was paid to carry out this survey. I thought, well, that's a cracking research project, isn't it? I mean, and all he's told us is presumably what we already knew, that those who felt fulfilled in the bedroom had higher levels of life satisfaction in middle and older age. It's hardly a revelation, is it, to be honest?
I mean, I want to see his methodology, frankly, but I mean,
I'm
great.
sure I think I can do without seeing his methodology.
I misheard you then. You want to see his what?
Methodology.
And I thought they said you were from the Spectator, not you were a spectator.
Spectator, not voyeur.
Listen, at my age, any action, that means I've had fibre for my breakfast. That's the only action I get these days.
I mean, I think it's great to see, the over-50s heeding Jeremy Hunt's message to get more active. As long as, it's no sort of hip replacements, etc. I mean, good on them, frankly.
Yeah, well, I saw this one. Lloyds gives Farage, our very own GB News Farage, a lifeline. But, and I have to say, I roared with laughter when I saw this headline in the Mail, but offers counselling to staff alarmed by Tories, which I kind of thought they were. The head of human resources said that she tells you first of all her pronouns are a she, her, and she emailed everybody saying how appalled she was about the questioning of transgender that happened at the Tory party conference. So they're all going to get counselling, people who work at Lloyds. Don't you think that's just a joke, a waste of time, and somebody creating a job for themselves?
Do you know what, Esther? In my job, I did a corporate function for a company quite recently, and I got an email to say, you must not use the term ladies and gentlemen. Can't say it.
I know, I've heard that too. It is, I know you're not allowed to say that. It's ridiculous.
Maybe I'm old.
The world's gone mad, James, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I won't need counselling after this with you two, I promise you that. Offers counselling stuff. I mean, I think it's a little bit ridiculous. I mean, good on them for giving Nigel Farage finally a bank account, but just quite extraordinary, and I don't really know what prompted it. I mean, as far as I could tell, the rhetoric wasn't like,
what a load of rubbish.
John, James, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We appreciate it. You let me off. I totally do. You let me off lightly, I think, this hour, John, so thank you for that. Anyway, coming up, as the White House suggests it may end aid to Ukraine in light of the Israel-Hamas conflict, we're joined by a Democratic political analyst for the latest US news.
Plus, is the horse racing industry capitulating to protesters? And your latest sports and showbiz updates too with Aidan and Hayley. But first, here's an update from Pip.
Esther, thank you. Breaking news within the last hour, and that is that a senior Hamas commander has been killed in airstrikes. He is believed to have played a major role in that terrorist atrocity on Israel a week ago today. That attack which killed more than 1,300 people. Now, Hamas, the terrorist group, has not confirmed his death, but Israeli Defense Forces say that this senior Hamas commander has died. And in other breaking news, we understand that US citizens will be able to leave Gaza via the Rafah border crossing into Egypt. That's coming from a US official. No word yet if citizens from any other countries are being allowed to leave, but that crossing will be open this afternoon following an agreement between the Israeli and Egyptian governments. Palestinians have just a matter of hours now, Palestinians in North Gaza, to evacuate south. Tens of thousands of them have been fleeing by vehicle and on foot. But the UN chief is saying that this mass evacuation is extremely hazardous, and he is pleading for humanitarian access. Meanwhile, the UK has confirmed the RAF is helping to evacuate British citizens from Israel, with flights operating from Tel Aviv to Cyprus. You're currently looking at live pictures of Gaza City, where Israeli airstrikes continue to pummel the infrastructure, pulverise buildings, and also, we understand, within the last hour, those airstrikes have killed a senior Hamas commander. We'll bring you the latest again very shortly.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Saturday Morning Live. The time now is 11:28. There's a lot been going on in the USA recently, from rows over Joe Biden's support for Israel, threatening aid to Ukraine, to the public bracing for a potential rerun of Trump versus Biden next year. So let's take a look at what was said in the White House this week.
I don't want to be trying to bake in long-term support when you're at the end of the rope. And in Ukraine, on the Ukraine funding, we're coming near to the end of the rope. I mean, today we announced $200 million, and we'll keep that aid going as long as we can, but it's not going to be indefinite.
Well, to get the latest, we're joined by Democratic political analyst Namika Konst. Namika, thank you very much. I don't know if you heard that clip there from the White House earlier this week. It seemed to sneak that out very quietly. It seemed to be a big shift in American policy. Before we've heard that Ukraine will get whatever they need for as long as they need it. It seems that there was a definite change in emphasis there. Is that because of the support that America's now having to give to Israel, or is it because Trump's promise to end the war in Ukraine quickly is going down well with voters?
I actually think it has to do with the shutdown, the next looming shutdown and the speaker's race. We are in a very prickly situation, as you might be aware, in the House of Representatives right now. So we have our appropriations set for a short period of time, which is what he's referring to, by the previous Congress before we had our stall in terms of who the speaker is going to be. As soon as we know who that speaker is going to be, and if it is Jim Jordan has said, Representative Jordan has said that he is not in favor of funding Ukraine, which is an existential threat to the United States and to security around the world. So I believe that the sooner we have a speaker in place that is not echoing Donald Trump's pro-Russia talking points, we are going to be in a situation that we can further the funding that we've been allocating all along. I think Kirby was relaying the points of the situation right now, which is purely that the appropriations are going to run out within a couple of months until we have a new speaker, until we have a new Congress, congressional leadership, and we can plan for the next several months. But President Biden has said over and over, he's made the case, even last week, that we are firmly committed to Ukraine, and he will make that case to the American people. Donald Trump wants to play pro-Russia and talk about, how we should be funding wars. Donald Trump doesn't want to fund anything. He doesn't want to fund the American people. He doesn't want to fund wars. He wants to basically rip apart any form of democracy or standing up for democracy, and that is dangerous. That's dangerous for all of us. That's dangerous for the UK. You guys know more than anybody what that does to your system and your economy. So, about the stall of government.
Namiki, you don't like Donald Trump, but he's surging ahead of Joe Biden in the opinion polls in America. I mean, Joe Biden's, if he's the candidate at the general election, he's going to just handing the results over to the Republicans, aren't you? Surely Biden isn't going to be your candidate at the presidential election, is he?
Oh, I absolutely do believe Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee, of course. Joe Biden is leading in New Hampshire right now, which is very important. So it's all about those early states. If we do these general opinion polls, and there are some polls that are swayed towards Trump, and there are some polls that are swayed more towards journalism, let's say. So right now, in New Hampshire, Joe Biden is leading the polls by a lot. Now, Donald Trump, of course, is leading the Republican polls by a lot, but he's under multiple indictments at this point. And I just don't see him having an effective campaign with boots on the ground, with volunteers, with an actual structural campaign staff that's working within the Republican National Committee, which is how you win an election.
Namiki, whilst you're obviously hoping it would be Biden, do you have anybody on your radar just in case, he wasn't well enough or he decided not to stand again because he is elderly? Is there anybody you've got in the background you'd say, yep, that's who the Democrats would go for?
I don't think we're in that place at all. I mean, President Biden runs around the country multiple times a week. He's working very long hours. I mean, this is a man who is in great shape. His doctors have said this over and over again. Compared to Donald Trump, lies about his weight. He's basically the same age and is not in great health. I mean, it's just interesting how the Republican talking points about Joe Biden's health have really permeated mass media when there's absolutely no indication that he's not absolutely spot on. This is somebody who has more experience when it comes to foreign policy. At this moment, I think that is extremely important for us to keep, our eyes on the ball as a country, in that we have a leader who has this 4 years of experience, 30 of which...
Namiki Const, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning and giving us the latest on that.
You heard it here first. Joe Biden's in great shape.
Well, I was trying to be kind, wasn't I? Saying, well, if it weren't him, if he did decide maybe he wasn't up for another sort of 5 years of office, who they have, but then that sounds to me they've got nobody else. There was nobody else they could name.
Apparently he's running around like a teenager. Tripping up the stairs is obviously not really happening. He's running around like a teenager. Anyway, there you go.
Coming up, we've got the chief executive of the Jockey Club, as well as a spokesperson from Animal Rising, joining us to discuss new animal welfare measures at the Grand National. Is it a necessary change or a capitulation to protesters?
Plus your latest sports and showbiz news with the legendary Aidan McGee and Hayley Palmer after these headlines with Pip Thompson.
Phil, thank you. It's 11:35, the headlines from the GB newsroom. An agreement has been reached to allow foreigners to exit Gaza through the Rafah border crossing today. The United States has negotiated with Israel, Egypt and Qatar to open the crossing from southern Gaza into Egypt. Now, this is crucially important because it will allow people to flee and hopefully humanitarian aid to come in. They are working to open that corridor for 5 hours this afternoon. The Palestinian Health Ministry, as you look at these pictures from Gaza City where Israeli airstrikes continue to flatten buildings, the Palestinian Health Ministry say at least 2,269 Palestinians have been killed and almost 10,000 wounded due to Israeli attacks in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, where violence has also broken out. That is the northern part of Gaza that you are looking at now. Israeli Defence Forces are carrying out localised raids and ground troops have been entering the territory. This is the first signs of a ground incursion by Israel since last weekend's Hamas terrorist attack. Israeli military say it has killed Ali Kadi. Now, he's a senior Hamas commander who led that cross-border attack on Israeli settlements a week ago today. Israel say Hamas terrorists are still holding at least 120 Israelis hostage. And there were reports that bodies of captives have been found during raids, but that has not been denied. In fact, Israel has denied that its military recovered those bodies of missing Israelis, which was contradicting earlier reports. Well, the United Nations are warning that over 2 million people are at risk as water supplies run out and humanitarian aid is blocked from going into Gaza. Airstrikes on Gaza City throughout the night has caused yet more damage, has caused yet more deaths and injuries. A Palestinian rescue team, you're looking at those pictures now, was hit by a missile while they were attempting to care for the wounded amongst the rubble. Israeli military say it is destroying Hamas targets in its strikes and has killed dozens from the militant group, including that senior Hamas commander. Casualties are being brought to hospitals in southern Gaza as tens of thousands of people struggle to flee the shelling. Israeli Defence Forces have given them just a matter of hours now to flee south, to find safety and shelter and to stay alive. Israeli journalist Yotam Confino has told GB News that if those being told to move do not do so, well, this death toll could reach much higher numbers.
Well, the latest is that there were just rockets fired over Tel Aviv, so I had to run for shelter just a couple of minutes ago. But of course, there is another situation which is more focused on right now, and that is Gaza, which is experiencing heavy bombardment by Israel. And Israel is, of course, encouraging civilians to move from the northern part of the Gaza Strip to the southern part. And I was just on an IDF briefing, a military briefing, where they said that they had announced 2 safe corridors where people can move safely for around 6 hours. And, of course, they're hoping civilians will do that because if they don't, the death toll in Gaza will rise significantly.
Turning our attention to northern Israel because the Israeli army says it is looking into an incident involving a Reuters journalist in southern Lebanon. Now, southern Lebanon is on the border with northern Israel, and that is where Hezbollah operate. Issam Abdallah was killed on Friday when missiles struck him and a group of other journalists. They were working in Alma al-Shab near the border where the Israeli military and Hezbollah, another proscribed terrorist group, have been exchanging fire. 6 other journalists were injured. The UN Secretary-General says the incident shows the danger of the violence spreading.
I want to say how much this demonstrates the enormous risk of spillover of this conflict.
We're staying across this ever-deepening conflict, and you can get more on all of those stories and more by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, it's 11:43. Now, the Grand National has announced it will be bringing in a swathe of new regulations on the maintenance of its racehorses in a bid to improve animal welfare.
Measures such as reducing the field from 40 horses to 34 and adding protective padding to the jump fences will come into force next year following reviews of data and research by the organisation.
The announcement has led many to say that the new rules are a capitulation to angry animal rights protesters after demonstrators from Animal Rising disrupted the race earlier this year. But was it in fact a necessary improvement that is long overdue? Well, joining us now is the Chief Executive of the Jockey Club, who owns Aintree Racecourse, Nevin Truesdale. Nevin, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to put it to you, Nevin, that if Animal Rising hadn't done their protest at the Grand National earlier this year with all of the publicity that came with it, you wouldn't have been making these changes to the Grand National.
That's not the case at all, Philip. We review the race and we review all the areas of the race, some of which Esther mentioned, the introduction there, every year. You know, what we're doing here is we're looking at the evolution of the race over a 10-year period, looking at statistics around faller rates, pull-ups, speed of horses, type of ground, always with our objective to make sure we have a relentless focus on welfare of the horses. That is our #1 priority. And actually, we've actually made changes pretty much every year for the last 10 years. Some of these changes are probably more eye-catching than maybe some of the changes we've made in the past, but it is absolutely not a reaction to anything that happened this year. We would never allow illegal, disruptive protesters to dictate the future of this race. It's too important a sporting asset for that. It's a national institution. It's right up there with the Open Golf, the Grand Prix, the FA Cup, and we want to maintain and improve it over time, and that's what we're doing with these changes.
So, Nevin, do you accept then that without these changes, the Grand National had been cruel?
I don't think we'd accept the word cruel, Esther. I mean, if you look at the statistics around this race, I don't think it's ever been safer. The fact is that in jumps racing, 99.8% of horses come back perfectly safe and sound from their races. There's a bigger chance of a horse having an accident in the stable or in the field or on the gallops where it's based rather than on a racetrack. So I don't think we'd accept that the race is cruel at all. What we're looking to do is make sure that we leave no stone unturned to make sure that the race is as safe as possible, to make sure that jockeys are as safe as possible, and to give ourselves maximum opportunity to show that we are taking all the steps we can when we can. And this is another natural evolution of these changes.
Nevin, the Grand National was always supposed to be the ultimate test of horse and rider, and I think the criticism is that you're sort of neutering that particular test. It's just going to be like any other long-distance race. And obviously, as you've just said, a horse can have an injury in a field, just running around a field. There are bound to be more fatalities in the Grand National at some point. Then you're going to reduce the field to 28, to 24, to 20. By the time you've finished, you might still have the Grand National, but it won't be anything like it was supposed to be.
No, I think what we're trying to do, I wouldn't accept that at all, Phil. What we're trying to do here is show that the race, it is still unique. It is almost unique over those fences. There are only, I think, 4 other races that race over those big birch fences. 34 is still a field size that is very significantly above any other jumps race. It is still the same distance. It is still run on similar sort of ground. There are so many elements of it that remain unique, and it has always evolved. It has always changed over the years. And actually, the large majority of these changes, in fact, all of these changes, will do nothing at all to alter the fantastic spectacle and the fantastic enjoyment that people get from it. So I would contend very strongly that it remains a unique test of the thoroughbred racehorse. And its ability to compete over that long distance, and also of the jockeys.
Nevin Truesdale, Chief Executive of the Jockey Club, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. We appreciate it.
Well, we're joined now.
Thank you, Esther.
Thank you. We're joined now in the studio by Animal Rising spokesperson Louisa Hillwood. So, Louisa, you've won. You got what you wanted. Is that it now?
I wouldn't say it's what we wanted.
Well, what do you want?
These changes by the Jockey Club are essentially an attempt to hide what really happens in the racing industry from the public. And the eyes of the public are on the Jockey Club, especially because of the 3 horses who died last year in the Grand National: Hill 16, Dark Raven and Envoy Special.
Animal Rising didn't help to that by getting all of the horses frustrated because you actually did a protest and delayed the race start. So you didn't help actually to the animal safety there at all. But what is it that you would like to see happen if this wasn't enough? These changing of terms aren't enough.
Well, what I would like is for us to envision a future where we can enjoy animals for who they are, not what they bring us and what we use them for.
So no horse racing, no jumping, no horse racing, nothing like that. Is that what you want to see an end of?
No race horses, because you don't have any race horses without racing.
We can enjoy horses for the beautiful creatures that they are.
Look, but can I didn't get your answer. Do you want to stop racing altogether? Is that your end goal?
Yes.
That's their end goal. That's their end goal. There will be no race horses.
Along with the use of animals in other industries as well, including in our food system.
Have you ever been to a racing stable to see how well they're looked after?
I understand your point, but that's not my point.
No, but have you actually been to see how well they're looked after?
A horse dies every other day in British racing. And last year at the Grand National, as I said, 3 horses died. And these changes are an attempt by the Jockey Club to make it seem like this race is acceptable.
Right, so I'm learning. I go to the races and what have you, but I didn't know how many horses died just out in the field running round. Did you understand that? Did you know that?
Well, this point that Nevin has brought up quite a few times is actually not true.
But it is true.
It's not based on evidence.
It's true.
Well, look, we can keep saying it's true, it's not true. And so, Louisa, thank you very much for giving us your reaction to what Nevin Truesdale had to say there about the changes to the Grand National. Your views have been coming in thick and fast about all sorts of things. We were talking about prisons earlier. Mike says the prison service has been seriously neglected and its standards are way below par. They need upgrading and a lot of expenditure to meet today's challenges. And Anne says we should not be letting prisoners out. They're inside for a reason, and there are more than enough criminals outside of prison with no hope of them being caught who are such a threat to our community.
And we also asked our viewers, do we have not enough prison places, or are too many people going to prison? Well, the result is
85.6% of you say there are not enough prison places, and 14.4% of you say there are too many people going to prison. So quite an overwhelming response to that, which doesn't come as any great surprise to me. Anyway, we're delighted to have our very own sports guru, Aidan McGee, and showbiz journalist Hayley Palmer with us in the studio for the rest of the show. Welcome, both of you.
But I was going to start with Aidan there. Did you hear that? Really, what Animal Rising was? They just want to have an end, full stop, to all horse racing, get rid of all horse racing.
Well, this is the problem, Esther, because if you placate these organisations bit by bit, you'll know this from the political environment, OK, the political sphere. You placate just a little bit, and then it becomes unrecognisable from what they originally wanted 5 years before until the whole thing is eliminated so many years down the line. There comes a point where you have to say, no, we're actually going to keep it as it is. There isn't a groundswell of opinion around the country that says that they want the Grand National to change completely.
No, 600,000 people watch it round the world. Like
600 million.
Sorry, 600 million people, nearly 1 billion people watch it. The most watched race, isn't it, in the world?
Exactly. Let's not change it too much. Let's keep it as it is for a while, yeah?
Hayley, what's happening in the world of showbiz?
Well, I want to talk about Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, because I'm confused, Phil, because it doesn't take a lot to get me confused.
I'm glad you said that and not me.
But I thought that they were together, didn't you?
Well, they pretended they were together. We only found out yesterday they're not
together. They've been separated since 2018. But I just don't understand why the slap happened at the Oscars, because surely if you're not together, why would Will have got so jealous? It just doesn't make any sense.
You can still be in someone's mind, though, Hayley. You can still be in someone's mind after a relationship finishes, after a fling finishes.
You seem to be talking from personal experience there.
Yeah, I definitely thought that came from the heart. I definitely did. But you're quite right. What was that all about? The whole sort of, as you say, slap at the Oscars. They were pretending to be loved up. They'd been separated for 7 years. But why did she do the interview this week to say it's all over? What was that about? Why didn't she do it any other time in the last 7 years?
I just don't understand. But the thing is, they don't live together, and apparently they're never going to get divorced from each other. That's the agreement they've got.
Well, that's financial to me. That sounds like they're not wanting to split their many millions.
And I just think Will, it just seems like a lovely-natured guy. To me, it doesn't
not
make...
at the Oscars he wasn't, was
No, I know, but that's why I was so shocked about that, Phil, because it doesn't make any sense, because he does seem really chill, and that's why the slap thing was such a shock.
Do you think actors are always actors, then? They're always acting.
Well, actors are usually troubled, actually. I know a lot of actors, and they've got a different side to them.
Just very quickly, we ought to talk about the Wembley yesterday, not flying the Israeli flag on the arches. It's been very controversial, that.
Yeah, it has. They had the option, the FA this is, to light up the arch, as they've been prone to do in the last 7 or 8 years, ever since the FA started venturing into politics inexplicably. They could have lit up the arch in blue and white, the Israeli colours. They opted not to. Instead, they had a minute's silence. And, you know, the FA made a red rod for their own back here. You know, if you suddenly start venturing into politics, something that nobody at the FA appears to understand anything about, by the way, and I've dealt with them many times over the last 10, 15 years, but once you start venturing into that territory, eventually you're going to be put into an invidious position where you're making a decision. You have to fall on one side, and that was a case in point in the last 48 hours or so, and that's why they ended up embarrassed. And the chairman of the Israeli FA even put out a statement yesterday saying they were wrong.
Thank you very much indeed, and Hayley too.
Yeah, that's it for us. Up next, it's GB News Saturday with the wonderful Martin Daubney, so stay tuned for that.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Certainly feels that autumn is now in full swing. We've got northerly winds bringing rather cold air down from the Arctic across the UK. Do notice how those isobars are really tightly packed together in the northeast. 70-mile-an-hour gusts across the Fair Isles this morning and will remain pretty blustery across northeastern and eastern areas of the UK, making it feel even colder here. Those northerly winds bringing showers down as well will turn wintry over the higher grounds of Scotland, maybe some hail to lower levels of Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. Best of the shelter for the Scottish borders down towards Norfolk, but temperatures below average for the time of year, generally 10 to 13 degrees Celsius. Showers will tend to ease off a touch inland overnight, probably still persisting across some windward coastal areas, might push through the Cheshire Gap as well. But underneath those starry skies that we see elsewhere, temperatures will be dropping off rapidly. A widespread frost for many of us, and certainly seeing down to -3, -5 degrees Celsius in some rural areas. So quite a chilly start to Sunday morning, but it will also provide a fair amount of sunshine as well. The showers really easing off for most of us. They will persist though across the far north of Scotland, where it will be cloudier here. But for elsewhere, a good amount of sunshine throughout the day, and with lighter winds as well, that might just make it feel that little bit better, but temperatures still no better than 10 to 13 degrees Celsius. We hold on to the fine conditions into the start of next week as well. Might turn a little bit unsettled later on in the week though. Enjoy your day.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to